I started playing drums when I was 8, and I got my first set of drums. My dad bought his brother's 1929 set of Gretsch drums, not sparkle or anything, they were wood, you know, and the heads were calfskin heads, you know, and you had to turn them with a key and stuff like that. And but I love those drums because I never had a full set before. And as time went on, I got better performing, and I got to be a better drummer. And then in some of the high school bands I was with, I started singing background vocals to the singer in the band. And then even at some point, I would be playing drums and singing the lead on a couple songs. And I enjoyed singing so much that I decided it would behoove me to find a good drummer and just get up and sing. And that's what I did. And I'm, you know, in my early days as a singer, I was influenced by John Lennon, Steve Woodward, Steve Marriott, you know, all the blue-eyed soul guys, you know. And that's you know, I wear those influences on my sleeve.
Absolutely.
Well, after the I think it was just before the accident with Kiss, Spooky Tooth, who Mick was playing guitar for that band, was in Rochester doing a concert, and Black Sheep's Spooky Tooth was on A&M Records, and Black Sheep's manager was an A&M record rep. So he knew that we were all crazy Spooky Tooth fans, and he said, "I got a surprise for you guys. I got tickets to see them perform," and we were psyched. And then he says, "I also got you backstage passes, so be on your best behavior," you know. So I brought the 2 Black Sheep albums on Capitol Records with me, and after we met the guys in Spooky Tooth, I gave those albums to Mick, and I says, "Here, you know," I says, "I'd like you to have these and give them a listen. This is what we're about," you know. And that was the end of it. I didn't hear from him for quite a long time. And Black Sheep's first show with Kiss was in Boston. We were opening their tour for the new album coming out. And we were supposed to be going on around the U.S. and Canada and South America for 8-10 months. And so the show in Boston was on Christmas Eve. And we opened for them, and we played our show, and we got a standing ovation. We drove the audience crazy. And we came off the stage, and we went over to Kiss's tour manager and said, can we take our ovation? He says, "Yeah, go ahead." So we went back on stage and we played one more song, and they were even crazier. And we thanked them and said goodnight. We came off the stage and we dried off and stuff. Then we went into the audience because we wanted to hear Kiss, you know. And it was a great night, and we were starting to get to know them a little bit. And so the band members got in our big white Ford Galaxy and started driving back to Rochester, New York from Boston. And we all got home. I had been in bed for about 2 hours already when I got a phone call, and it was Steve Nider, who was our crew chief. And he says, "I got bad news." He says, "It was snowing like crazy with ice underneath the snow." He said, "We slid off the New York State Thruway and rolled over." He says, "We're okay." He says, I couldn't tell you how the equipment is, though." I says, "Because I can't get the door open." So me and the bass player, Bruce Turgan, jumped in the band car and went back and picked up the crew guys, three crew guys. and a big tow truck flatbed had already loaded our truck on there and took it off the thruway and parked it in a gas station. And so everybody went home. We took everybody home, and they enjoyed Christmas as well as they could, with their families. But the day after Christmas, we were supposed to make our way to Miami and play with Kiss at the, I think, the Miami High Lie. And I had no idea how we were going to do that, So I called Capitol Records and told them our situation, and I says, can we get some new equipment on your dime, mostly drums and amplifiers, and the B3 was okay, but the legs were snapped off the bottom. So, I says, and we need something to transport our equipment. And they said, we can't do this for you. No real good reason. To me, it felt like they didn't believe in us, And so left with that answer, I had to call Kiss's tour manager and let them know our predicament, and that unfortunately we would not be there for the show. So one show into a 8-10 month tour, we were gone. We had no truck. We had very little equipment. The only equipment we had is the stuff we carried with us in the car. So the drums, the keyboards were damaged, the amplifiers were shot, and we would meet every 2 or 3 days and have like a band meeting, and pretty soon it got to be there was nothing to talk about. We were waiting for our insurance settlement. So the accident happened on Christmas Eve. We settled with our insurance company in the middle of May. And by the time we were on the verge of disbanding, a month or so after the accident, my dad called me, and he says, I got a call for you earlier today by this guy named Mick Jones. He says he'd like for you to call him back if possible. I got all his information, so I took the information and I called him back. And he says, hi, he says, this is Mick. He says, do you remember me? He says, I met you at the Auditorium Theater with Spooky Tooth. I said, oh yeah. I said, how you doing? He goes, oh, he says, I'm doing good. He says, I left Spooky Tooth and I'm just starting to form my own band now. He says, I did get to hear your albums, and I really like the way you sing. He says, would you consider coming to New York on my dime? He says, and auditioning? He says, we have most of the band together. He said, we'd like to hear you sing, And I says, I really appreciate that offer. I said, so I told him what happened to Black Sheep and the tragedy that kind of befell us, And he felt bad about that, and I told him I want to see things through with my band, I don't want to just bail out, And he said he understood that. He asked if I minded if he called me back in about 3 weeks or a month, and I said that's fine. So in that 3 weeks we all decided, we begged our parents to help us with equipment and stuff, and that didn't work. So we couldn't play a show if we wanted to, So we reluctantly disbanded. And when Mick called back, I told him that the band broke up. I says, and if you'll send me a ticket, he says, I told him I'd like to come to New York and audition. So that's what I did. I met him and most of the rest of the band because we didn't have a drummer yet. And I met them at a studio, and they had a few demos already recorded. So I got to listen to the demos a couple times. And then he had the words written out. He gave me a piece of paper with the words on, put me in the studio in front of a mic. I had to sing. You know, I barely heard the song twice. But, you know, I started to sing, and after a couple times through, I got all the nuances. And then after that, there was another song, and then another song, you know. And we worked till about 9 at night. And a friend of mine, neighbor, in the Lower East Side, were a friend of mine had a friend who had an apartment next to his, and he and his wife were in Europe for 2 or 3 months. So they agreed to let me have that apartment to use while I was in New York. It was very nice. So the next day, I think Mick invited me over to his apartment, and we started working on Long Way From Home. And when I left a small town for the apple in decay, you know, and it was a reference to me leaving Rochester to go to New York City. Oh, he loved that, you know. And so then we worked on something else too. I think it might have been a little bit of Cold as Ice. And so we worked almost every day, and then we, with the rest of the band, we recorded demos of the things we were working on. And I said finally, when we were all sitting around, the band, we were all sitting around in the rehearsal room, and I says, guys, I says, I gotta ask you something. I says, I've been working with you now for over 2 weeks. Am I in? Nobody's told me anything yet, you know. I've been working away. I don't even know if I'm doing this as a favor or if I'm actually in the band. And they go, you're in the band, come on, you know. So I says, well, I've got to fly home to get some clean clothes. I said, I've been wearing the same clothes 3 weeks now. I says, and I barely brought a pair of extra underwear when I came down here. I thought I'd be down here for a day. So you know, I started getting a small paycheck then, which helped. I was able to take care of myself a little bit. And I met Bud Prager, Foreigner's manager. Liked him a lot. And he was a real straight shooter. And once, well, we had about 5 or 6 songs, and we started to get record companies into the rehearsal area right across the hall from Bud Prager's office. There was like an area where we rehearsed, you know. And we had Capitol Records and Columbia and Elektra, Asylum, and excuse me.
That's okay.
Just a whole bunch of them came down to hear us, and the results were they all said they thought we had a lot of promise, but they weren't quite interested enough to sign us. We even had Atlantic Records come down, and John Kolodna was the A&R head of A&R at that point. And we played our songs from him, and we got a little note from Atlantic that they enjoyed meeting us and hearing the songs. They said we got a lot of promise, but they pass.
Wow.
And then the next day, John Kolodna came back to the place where we rehearsed and sat us down and said, he says, your songs are very good. They show a lot of promise. He says, they don't have to be 6 or 7 minutes long though, you know. He says, this is American rock radio, 3.5 minutes tops, you know. So he said, I'd like you to edit your songs retaining the best and the most exciting parts, and just doing away with the long 3-minute chorus out, you know. So he says, and then I'm going to have the other A&R guys from Atlantic come back. He says, and this time I'm bringing Jerry Greenberg, who was the president. And so that was big. So they came down, and we played really well, and I think Jerry and most of the A&R people got a better grasp on what the songs could sound like as hit singles, you know. And we were signed the next day. The album came out in '77. We recorded at Atlantic Studios in Columbus Circle. And that was awesome. We had to shoo Diana Ross out of there because she was still recording past her recording time, you know, and we didn't want her to infringe on our time, so we had her gently and affectionately shushed out the door, you know. It was all right. She's beautiful. She was beautiful then, I'll tell you. And so it was a really exciting time, and we had some great adventures while recording the album, including when we were recording As Cold as Ice. We were trying to get the harmonies cold, cold, cold as ice, and we couldn't get the timing on it. And then we got the timing, but one of the notes was flat every time we did it. So I think it was towards the end of January, and it had to be about 1:45 in the morning. We've been working since about 10 in the morning, and the morning previous. And so we all got our coats on and our hats because it was freezing, single digits. And we went outside and walked around a big block, and then came back up the other way and went back into the studio, you know, and Mick goes, everybody's mind cleared? And we were all laughing, and we nailed it. Crazy. We played their hockey arena, Civic Center, yeah. It was great. And it was a real terrific first bunch of shows, and playing there was fantastic. And that city was in transition at that point. It was a little bit dank and run down, and I guess the local economy was not doing well. And I think I was told by some locals that they were in the process of shutting down one of the last legs of the coal mines in that area, and the city spirit was down, and restaurants and entertainment places were going under, and it didn't look very promising for Pittsburgh. And we had a good show there. It was sold out. We played with the Doobie Brothers, and I think a year later we came back and we headlined it ourselves. And things looked a little more scrubbed clean. The flags were flying on all the civic buildings. There was new construction going on downtown, and I think there was a restaurant where two rivers meet in Pittsburgh, and I think it was called the Incline. Yeah, I've been there a number of times, but it was the first time I was there, and it was just they were just closing, and we came there. They were expecting us, so it was our band. Well, it wasn't the Doobies. It was us on the second time around. We were the headliners, so it was our band and our crew and our management and stuff. and a couple of guys from Atlantic Records. And they took our orders and brought us some drinks. And right away, the waiters came out with a covered up tray, and then they placed the tray down and took the cover off. And it was lines of cocaine with glass snifters, And we were like, what is this, What is this place, Oh, well, we don't want to insult them. So we partook, and from that point on, it was one of the funnest parties I think I've ever been to. The owner and the people who worked there were just wonderful to us. The food was fantastic, and I think we stayed there until about 3 in the morning. We worked hard in the studio, and our tours were not short tours. They were always over a year, maybe more. And he was a hard worker too. Whenever we played someplace that was one of his areas, he went out of his way to make sure the promotion was killer. He would take us to the morning stations himself. He'd be in the lobby waiting for us at 6 a.m. And it was always fun. We were barely awake, and we were in a town car, and even though we couldn't even collect our own thoughts, we were laughing our asses off at him at 6:15 in the morning. And he was just like that. And the funny thing was, when we get to the radio stations, the DJs would start laughing with him. They all knew what a corker he was, And it was just we had relationships with good relationships with a lot of our promoters, but most of them were more subdued and a little more business, but he was as bad as any of us, and he didn't make any bones about it. And that endeared him to us more. Well, there were a few. I think the Foreigner 4 album was far and away my favorite album with Foreigner, and that tour was over a year and a half long, and we put a lot out. I remember playing Myrtle Beach. And not the next day, but the day after that, having to be in Seattle for an outdoor show. And when we got off stage, we went right down the stairs of the stage onto the bus, and we started driving. And we only stopped to fill up the gas tank, and that's when anybody who had to go pee went to pee, And we slept, and we'd wake up and we'd play cards, and we'd nod off again. It was not a great night for sleeping, because I think we were playing in the Mariners Stadium, and it was a huge rock show. I can't remember which one it was, but we, about 10 or 12 miles out from the stadium, we started changing our clothes into our gig clothes. We're not even able to shower or anything, Able to just wash our face and screw our hair up a little bit, and I was actually worried sick that we were going to sound like shit. But somehow, whether it was the adrenaline or we got on stage and we rocked the house. I don't know. Adrenaline, I don't know where it was coming from. Well, I know a little bit where it was coming from, but it was a really great show, and the audience was great, and the other bands around us were fantastic, and I'll always remember that insane journey when we got off the stage after playing one night. And basically, when we woke up, it was time to play again.